The morning had started with peace. The kind of peace so fragile you were afraid even your own footsteps might shatter it. Mist still clung to the surface of Clearwater Lake, rolling across the water like pale smoke drifting out of some unseen fire. The air carried the smell of pine needles and damp earth, and the only sound was the lonely call of a loon far across the shoreline. I'd woken early, brewed a pot of strong coffee, and opened the cabin's windows to let the crisp air drift inside. My grandfather's cabin, a cedar-framed structure he had built with his own two hands in the 1950s, always smelled faintly of wood smoke, lake water, and varnish, like memory preserved in timber. Every morning I spent here was like stepping out of the frantic noise of modern life and into a slower rhythm of the world. But that rhythm was about to be broken. The first sign was silence. Not the natural kind, but the sudden, unnatural pause when birds stop singing and something else moves into the woods. A faint crunch of gravel. Tires. Then the slam of a car door. I poured the coffee into 2 mugs, my hands steady though my pulse quickened. I already knew who it would be before the door even flew open. The cabin's front door slammed wide, banging against the wall so hard the old frame rattled. Evelyn Sharp stormed in like a storm surge through a broken levee. Everyone in town called her Karen behind her back, and sometimes, not so behind her back, but to her face, people used the full name, Evelyn. Because she demanded it. She was the queen bee of the Clearwater Lake HOA, a woman with sharp blonde hair that never seemed to move, pressed white blouses that gleamed against the sun, and a clipboard she wielded like a sheriff's star. And she had chosen my cabin as her battleground. "Mr. Carter," she barked, her voice so sharp it cut through the morning quiet. This, she swept her arm at the room as if it offended her simply by existing, is a violation of Clearwater Lake standards. I didn't flinch. I didn't even put the coffee down. I set the second mug beside mine on the counter and turned slowly, letting the weight of silence answer her before my words did. "Good morning to you too, Evelyn," I said flatly. Her eyes narrowed, lips pursing into a disapproving knot. She marched across the cabin floor, her heels clicking against wood that had never known anything fancier than hiking boots and muddy sneakers. "This entire structure," she continued, wrapping her clipboard with a lacquered fingernail, "fails to meet HOA compliance. The deck is unapproved. The paint color is inconsistent with the community palette. And this rustic look," her nose wrinkled like she'd smelled rot, "is dragging down the property values of every resident who takes pride in Clearwater Lake." I clenched my jaw. "We've been over this. My land isn't within your HOA boundaries." Evelyn's smile was cold. "All land bordering the lake falls under our jurisdiction. It's in the revised covenant passed last spring. You'd know that if you attended the meetings." That made me laugh, though there was no humor in it. You can't redraw property lines just because you passed a motion in some clubhouse. Her heels clicked again as she moved deeper into the cabin. She ran her fingers over the mantle, fingers that had never known the rough calluses of work, and then she turned, her gaze roaming the interior like a critic reviewing a play she hated from the opening act. "This cabin is non-conforming," she said, like she was a judge delivering a verdict. "If you refuse to comply, the board will issue daily fines until it becomes subject to condemnation." A flash of heat tore through my chest. I wanted to throw her out right then, to slam the door behind her so hard the glass rattled in its panes. But instead, I leaned back against the counter and forced my voice to stay calm. "This cabin isn't just a structure," I said quietly. "It's my grandfather's. He built it with his hands when this lake was nothing but forest and dirt roads. It stood before your HOA ever existed. It'll stand long after your covenants are forgotten." For the first time, something flickered in her eyes, not sympathy, not doubt, but annoyance that I had dared give her history where she wanted rules. She tightened her grip on the clipboard, the way some people clench their fists before throwing a punch. "You can romanticize it all you want," she said, her voice rising, "but nostalgia doesn't excuse non-compliance. Your grandfather's shack is devaluing properties worth millions. And I will not let one stubborn man ruin what we've built here." Before I could answer, the sound came, a low crunch of tires on gravel, slow and deliberate. Both our heads turned toward the window, where a black SUV pulled into the drive, sleek and official. Evelyn's brows knit together. "Who is that?" The driver's door opened. Out stepped Thomas Riley, the state attorney general. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark suit that contrasted with the wilderness around us. Even from here, I could see the seriousness in his expression, the way his gaze swept the cabin before settling on the front porch. My lips curved into the smallest of smiles. "That," I said softly, "is someone you really don't want to meet right now." Evelyn stiffened. For the briefest moment, I thought she might turn pale. But pride is a dangerous fuel, and Evelyn Sharp ran on nothing else. She straightened her blouse, lifted her chin, and huffed. "Then I'll tell him myself," she declared. She stormed out the same way she had stormed in, heels clacking, clipboard rattling. I stayed where I was, watching through the window as she marched straight across the gravel toward the Attorney General. For a moment, I almost pitied her. Almost. Because she didn't know that in the folder under Riley's arm were not just documents about my cabin, but complaints and evidence about her. The morning that had begun with peace was about to erupt into war. The cabin's screen door snapped shut behind her, rattling in the frame as Evelyn Sharp stormed down the steps like she owned them. I stayed inside for a breath, steadying myself with the counter's edge, feeling the rough grain of the cedar beneath my fingertips. My pulse thudded in my ears. This was it, the moment when two unstoppable forces were about to collide. I stepped to the window, watching her heels strike the gravel like hammer blows. Clipboard clutched against her chest, chin tilted to the sky, she looked less like a neighbor and more like a prosecutor walking into a courtroom. And she was heading straight for Thomas Riley, who had just closed the door of his black SUV. Riley was no ordinary man. He carried himself with the weight of his office, shoulders squared, every movement deliberate. His presence seemed to shift the very air, quieting the birds, stilling the breeze, drawing every eye to him as though the woods themselves knew authority had arrived. Evelyn, of course, saw none of that. Or pretended not to. She charged forward, calling out before she was even halfway across the driveway. "Excuse me." Her voice was sharp enough to slice the morning air. "I'm Evelyn Sharp, president of the Clearwater Lake Homeowners Association, and I demand to bring a matter of urgent noncompliance to your immediate attention." Riley paused, one hand adjusting the folder under his arm. His eyes flicked briefly to me through the cabin window before settling on her. His face was unreadable, neither welcoming nor dismissive. "And you are?" His voice carried the authority of a man who asked questions not because he needed answers, but because he wanted to see how people would squirm while giving them. Evelyn smiled stiffly, the corners of her mouth twitching with forced charm. "As I said, I'm president of the HOA. We maintain the standards and property values of every home in this community. And this," she jabbed her finger toward my cabin, "is in blatant violation of our covenant." That was my cue. I pushed the door open and stepped outside, coffee mug still in hand. The morning sun had finally burned through the mist, casting the driveway in a golden glow, though the tension made the air feel heavy, almost storm-like. "Mr. Carter," Riley said, acknowledging me with a slight nod. His eyes sharpened on Evelyn again. "I assume this is the individual you mentioned in your letter?" "That's her," I confirmed, voice steady but carrying an edge. "Neighbor, enforcer, and constant thorn in my side." Riley let the words hang. Then he turned back to Evelyn, his gaze level, unblinking. "Mrs. Sharp, I'm here on official business with Mr. Carter. This property lies outside HOA jurisdiction by state law. Any attempt to enforce regulations here could constitute harassment." Evelyn froze, her clipboard clutched tighter. For a second, the confidence in her eyes flickered. But then she straightened, her pride stiffening her spine. "That's outrageous," she snapped. "This cabin is lowering the standards of Clearwater Lake. It doesn't match our architectural vision. It doesn't conform to the approved palette. And frankly, its very existence threatens the stability of property values for every family in this community." Her words tumbled out like rapid-fire shots, her desperation wrapped in authority. Riley, however, was a fortress. He flipped open the folder with slow precision, revealing embossed documents bearing the state seal. The sound of the papers cracking against the folder's spine was louder than her tirade. "Your vision," Riley said evenly, "is not his obligation. Mr. Carter has provided me with substantial evidence, repeated complaints, documented threats, and trespassing incidents linked to your association. His eyes narrowed, voice sharpening. If verified, these actions may constitute unlawful interference with private property. The color drained from Evelyn's face. She looked at me, then back at him, her lips quivering for the first time I'd ever seen. But her pride wouldn't let her stop. You don't understand, she insisted, her voice trembling but defiant. We're protecting families here. We're maintaining standards. If we let one cabin stand outside our authority, chaos will follow. People will paint their homes garish colors, build tacky sheds, put up fences. It'll be the end of Clearwater Lake as we know it. Riley closed the folder with a soft snap that sounded like a gavel strike. The law does not bend to protect aesthetics or property values. The words hung heavy in the air. Even the lake seemed to hush, the water rippling in silence. Evelyn swallowed hard, her throat working. Her eyes darted between us, between the Attorney General, immovable as stone, and me, arms crossed, rooted to the porch with the weight of every memory tied to this cabin. And then she lashed out. She jabbed a finger at me, the nail sharp and gleaming in the sunlight. He's manipulating you. He's obstinate, rude, impossible to deal with. He's poisoning this community with his stubbornness. If you side with him, you'll embolden others to defy our authority. This place will fall apart. I took a slow step forward, the porch creaking under my boots. My voice was low but carried across the driveway like a growl. Your authority ends where my land begins. I pointed at the cabin behind me, at the cedar beams weathered by decades of sun and snow. My grandfather built this place before you or your HOA even existed. He taught me how to fish in this lake, how to chop wood in these forests. Every plank in that cabin holds a piece of his life. And I'll be damned if you erase that legacy because you don't like the color of my paint. Her face twisted, pride and fury and disbelief battling inside her. She shook her head, stepping back like my words had pushed her. For a long moment, the three of us were locked in silence. Evelyn's breath came sharp and fast, my fists clenched at my sides, Riley's gaze moving between us with the calm weight of judgment. Finally, Riley spoke, his voice low but carrying finality. Mrs. Sharp, consider this your official notice. Any further interference with Mr. Carter's property will result in immediate legal action by the state. Do you understand? Evelyn's lips thinned into a bloodless line. She didn't speak. She just turned sharply, her heels digging into the gravel, and stormed toward her car. The clipboard rattled in her hands as she yanked the door open and climbed inside. The engine roared to life, the tires spitting dust and stones as she tore down the road. For a moment, silence reclaimed the lake. The breeze stirred again, birds cautiously resumed their song. But as I looked at Riley, at the folder still tucked under his arm, I knew this wasn't over. Not yet. 2 mornings later, I sat on the porch with a steaming mug of coffee warming my hands, staring out at the lake. The mist was gone, burned away by late summer heat, and the water glittered under a rising sun. From here, everything looked peaceful. Untouched. Eternal. But peace never lasted long when Evelyn Sharp was involved. The first rumble came low, distant, like a thunderstorm brewing behind the trees. I set the mug down, leaning forward in the chair. Gravel crunched. Engines drew nearer. Then they appeared. Not one car this time, but a convoy, trucks, SUVs, and sedans, tires chewing up the dirt road in a synchronized line of dust. They pulled into the drive like an occupying force. Doors swung open, figures spilled out, and at the front of it all stood Evelyn. Her blouse was pressed sharper than steel, her lipstick a perfect slash of crimson. She didn't march this time, she glided, as though determined to show control even as the ground shifted beneath her. But the tension in her jaw betrayed her. Behind her came the HOA board, 5 men and women clutching clipboards, shifting nervously, glancing at each other like kids dragged to the principal's office. And then, another vehicle. A second black SUV pulled in, parking deliberately across from Evelyn's car. The doors opened, and out stepped Thomas Riley, flanked by 2 uniformed deputies.
Their presence was a silent declaration: the state had returned, and it wasn't here for tea. The air tightened. Even the cicadas in the trees seemed to hush. Evelyn wasted no time. She strode forward, voice already sharp. "This man is defiant, uncooperative, and destroying our community standards," she declared, gesturing at me with a sweeping motion that nearly sent her clipboard flying. "We've tried to reason, we've tried to negotiate, and still he refuses. If you won't act, then we will." Her words rang across the clearing, trembling with righteous fury. But there was something else beneath them too: desperation. Riley didn't flinch. He stepped forward, his shoes crunching on gravel, his presence towering. "Mrs. Sharp," he said evenly, "you were warned. You ignored that warning. Now we're here with evidence of trespassing, unlawful entry, and harassment. Effective immediately, you and your association are under investigation for abuse of authority." The reaction was instant. Gasps erupted from the board members. One man's clipboard slipped from his hand, scattering papers across the gravel. A woman beside him whispered, "Oh my God," before quickly covering her mouth. Evelyn staggered back, her face blanching. Her carefully constructed mask cracked as panic flickered through her eyes. She shook her head once, twice, as if refusing to believe what she had just heard. You can't do this," she whispered. Riley's voice was calm, final. "I already have." The deputies stepped forward, producing evidence bags and clipboards of their own. They began collecting statements from board members, photographing documents, pulling files from Evelyn's SUV. Every movement was methodical, clinical, and irreversible. The board crumbled almost instantly. The same men and women who had stood behind Evelyn at countless HOA meetings now shrank from her like shadows retreating from the sun. One of them, a wiry man with glasses, muttered, "I told her this would go too far," before handing over a stack of papers to a deputy. Evelyn's grip on her clipboard loosened. It slipped from her hands and clattered to the gravel. She didn't bend to pick it up. Her eyes darted, searching for some lifeline, but none came. The weight of her authority she had worn like armor for years, was collapsing in real time. Still, she couldn't surrender. Pride wouldn't let her. She turned toward me, her eyes blazing with a mix of hatred and regret. "You think you've won, don't you? You think this cabin, this shack, is worth all this trouble? You're wrong. You're poisoning this lake. You're dividing neighbors. You'll see." I held her gaze, my voice steady, my words slow. "No, Evelyn. You did that yourself. This cabin doesn't divide people. You do." The silence that followed was heavier than any shout. Even the deputies paused, watching the exchange. Evelyn's lip trembled, but she said nothing more. When the deputies finally led her toward her SUV, it wasn't with handcuffs, not yet, but with the weight of inevitability. She climbed inside, her shoulders hunched, her clipboard forgotten in the dust. For the first time since I'd known her, Evelyn Sharp looked small. The convoy began to break apart. Board members scattered, some retreating into cars, others lingering with deputies to cooperate. The scene that had arrived like a conquering army dissolved into fragments of defeat. And then it was quiet again. Riley approached the porch, his expression softening as he looked at me. "It's over," he said simply. I nodded, though my chest was still tight, my hands still curled into fists I hadn't realized I was holding. "Feels like it." He glanced at the cabin, at the weathered cedar beams glowing warm in the sun. "This place is yours," he said firmly. "It always was. And now, it always will be." With that, he shook my hand, firm and steady, before turning back to his SUV. The deputies followed. Gravel crunched, engines started, and soon the state convoy was gone, leaving only the smell of dust and pine in their wake. I stood on the porch for a long while after, staring at the lake. The surface shimmered, calm and endless, reflecting the sky like glass. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt free. Later that week, word spread quickly through Clearwater Lake. The HOA board voted to dissolve under state oversight. New community leaders were chosen, people who valued cooperation over control,
who wanted to preserve the lake without strangling it with red tape.
And Evelyn?
Her finds were staggering. Riley told me privately she'd likely lose her home before it was over. She had built her empire on control, and now it had crumbled to dust in her own hands. On the last night of summer, I sat on the porch again, sipping whiskey instead of coffee. The stars shimmered above, and the lake stretched quiet and endless before me. The cabin stood solid behind my back, its cedar walls a testament to endurance. I thought of my grandfather, his laughter echoing across the water, his calloused hands guiding mine as we cast fishing lines, his voice reminding me that land and legacy were things worth fighting for. I raised my glass to him, to the cabin, to the lake.
Peace had returned. This time, it was mine to keep.